Hello, my name is Tim Duffield. Today I'd like to share a framework that allows for innovation and responsible risk-taking while ensuring that legitimate precautions are taken. My hope is that it will provide a risk management model that you can adopt or adapt to your specific circumstances and mandate. If you can make it through to the end, there's a link to some resources that you can download and use with your own staff. Let's look at the model.
At its core, the underlying philosophy of this program is rooted in our first service standard here at Muskoka Woods. No one can get hurt, no one does get hurt. I find it helpful to create this as an if-then statement. If no one can get hurt, then no one does get hurt. And so the question becomes, how can we create an environment where no one can get hurt? But before we continue, we need to say that we're using the term get hurt to encompass far more than a physical injury. We're including emotional, spiritual, and mental injury, to name a few. In short, anything that's detrimental to the health and well-being of our staff, our guests, or to Muskoka Woods. As these pictures aptly illustrate, it's also important to remember that perception of risk may be different for different people, and sometimes to those same people in different situations. Add to this the truth that there's never one single factor that has caused an incident, and you can easily end up with a very complex situation requiring a book full of rules and standard operating procedures. To illustrate this last point, let's consider the concept of Swiss cheese. Swiss cheese is an interesting product. Gases released during production create large voids in the cheese. These, of course, are not apparent until we slice the cheese and they appear to us as holes. If we simply reassemble the cheese to its original form, the holes are short-lived, become blocked by further slices of cheese. The Swiss cheese model illustrates that although many layers of defense lie between hazards and incidents, there are flaws in each layer that, if aligned, can allow the incident to occur. It's possible to reassemble the cheese slices in such a way as to provide us with a clear passage through any amount of cheese. However, it's also possible to reassemble the cheese slices in such a way as to provide us with a block to any clear passage through the cheese. It's therefore necessary to reduce, or preferably to eliminate, the possibility of the cheese slices being reassembled in a pattern that allows penetration all the way through. The next slide shows us an example. Here we can see that every potentially harmful situation was blocked by a protocol. We thought through the risks, we assessed them, and we came up with a management plan to interfere with them actually occurring. And so we asked the question again, how can we create an environment where no one can get hurt? Fortunately, we have two global standard practices to help us: the Risk Management Continuum and the Hazard Analysis Matrix. The continuum looks like this. Proceeding from left to right, we work through, and when necessary, return back to assessment. First thing we need to do is identify the risk, considering all the stakeholders. What are the risks to our staff, to our participants, to the public, to our property, and in fact, to staying in business? Then we simply assess those risks using the hazard analysis matrix. We choose the likelihood of our risk occurring and the potential severity if it does occur. As with any matrix, this gives us a resulting score which we can either accept or reject. For example, if we assess the likelihood as probable and the severity as critical, then the matrix gives us a score of 12. This is high and it's not acceptable. So we need to develop some controls. Looking briefly at the definitions for likelihood, also we could refer to it as probability, we see that we have a choice of may occur, it could occur, it might occur, it will occur, or it's expected to occur. Here are the definitions for severity, sometimes referred to as consequence. And you can see it ranges from cuts and bruises through to death and major destruction. At Muskoka Woods, we like the color green. Green in our logo, green on our gates, green on our risk matrix. If our risk matrix result is not green, then we must manage the risk. We can do this by developing controls that will reduce the likelihood or the severity, and sometimes both. By way of example, let's watch the following video. Make note of how both likelihood and severity of an incident have been reduced.
I don't give two hoots and a holler about flying inside a helicopter. Put me outside. That's where I want to be. On the magic carpet. Back in the late 1800s, there was a gentleman by the name of Michael Faraday. He had a theory that if you enclosed a man in a metal cage and energized that cage at whatever voltage, the man would still live. The voltage would flow around him. I wear a hot suit. It's 75% Nomex for fire retardant and 25% stainless steel thread. And that metal thread means I have a Faraday cage around me. 500,000 volts pass over my body, but I can work without interference from the electricity. As long as the helicopter is isolated from ground, we have the ability to bring ourselves to the same voltage potential as the line, like a bird on a wire. Our pilots are very smooth. It's like they can read our every thought. There's such a hunger for electricity these days. Nobody wants to take lines out of service just to maintain them. I've had many people ask me, do you think what you do is safe? And I say, well, in our operation, everything that we do, every move that we make is thought of and rehearsed before, so it's as safe as crossing the street. It's not a job for a hot dog. There's only three things I've ever been afraid of. Electricity, heights, and women. And I'm married, too.
There are many things the narrator mentioned that effectively reduce the likelihood of an incident occurring. Most notable, the importance of following the procedures as they've been developed and practiced. Remember his line, not a job for a hot dog? His closing line is also very insightful. A little fear of what we do is not always a bad thing. Unfortunately, in this case, the severity of one risk could not be reduced, though highly unlikely. In the event of a fall, the result would still be catastrophic. Looking closer to home, consider an activity like riding a bike. Since the invention of bikes, people have been falling off and hurting themselves. Here we've listed some ways to reduce likelihood and severity. A good rule of thumb is to consider rules and procedures, personal protective equipment, and level of challenge. So now we reevaluate the risk, assuming that our controls will be put in place. If these controls don't take us into the green, then we need to develop something different. So when the matrix finally gives us the answer with which we're comfortable, then we proceed to implement those controls. We train, and the final step, we supervise. Supervisors are required to ensure compliance. It's been said that sadly, you can only expect what you inspect. And don't forget to schedule for review. The greater the risk, the more frequently it should be reviewed. In our last few minutes, I'd like to talk about evaluation or monitoring. Leading indicators tell us what might happen. Lagging indicators tell us what did happen. They're both helpful, but I prefer to know about something before it happens so that I can take some steps to prevent it. At Muskoka Woods, we measure those same 3 points that were previously mentioned as a rule of thumb: rules and procedures, personal protective equipment, and level of challenge. We do this using a process called the Activity Safety Compliance Score. These are the points that we measure. Are the rules posted? Are they explained? Are they understood and followed? Is the PPE worn properly? Is it in good repair, properly sized to the guest and properly stored? And lastly, is competition healthy? Is challenge reasonable? If everything is good, this will give us a score of 10. If the score is less than 10, then we obviously need to do some follow-up. These are the materials that are available for download at this link. The matrix, the definitions, and the continuum are all there in French, English, Spanish, and Russian. There's also a wallet card that you can print and distribute to your staff. That's all we have time for today. If you have some thoughts or questions,